I'm going to be reviewing The Hobbit. This isn't going to have spoilers in it. And yeah, this is going to be kind of like a before you read, like what you should know before you read The Hobbit. Not so much regarding the story, but just determining if you should read it and what your expectations should be going in. So, first, some backstory. The Hobbit was actually supposed to be like a standalone novel separate from the rest of Tolkien's work, but he decided to make it part of his larger world, and yeah, that's kind of like the meta backstory about it. What the book's actually about, it is about a small hobbit person who is kind of pushed onto this adventure unwillingly by a wizard and a group of dwarves. So, yeah, and the adventure is basically to reclaim a mountain from a dragon. That is the basic premise of the book. It is actually, or was originally published as a children's book, but it isn't really associated that way anymore. It isn't kept in the children's section at bookstores, at least not the ones I've gone to. So it is kind of like more just associated with Lord of the Rings than it is as a children's book. So yeah, that's what it's about. My overall impressions of this book is I really liked it. It was fun, enjoyable to read, and now having read most of the Lord of the Rings, I think it's a really good introduction into this world without being overbearing. So if you're looking to get into Lord of the Rings, but you're a little bit daunted by those books for whatever reason, I think The Hobbit is a great place to start. Also, from what I've seen on Reddit and stuff, that's what most people recommend is starting with The Hobbit in the first place. Um, I think the thing that I like most about The Hobbit is the progression, both the physical progression and the character progression. So basically the kind of idea is Bilbo, the main character, who's a hobbit, does not like to be on adventures. He is very close-minded to it. He wants to be in his comfortable home, doing comfortable things, eating lots of food, stuff like that. And seeing that sort of continue throughout the story, but change and evolve as he grows to feel differently about the adventure is really good and interesting to me. I actually really like the characters in this book, and also how the dwarves' opinion of Bilbo changes throughout the book, and how Bilbo and the dwarves, specifically specific dwarves, but also the dwarves as a whole, as they kind of like grow together, change their opinions of each other. I think that's done really well, and I think why I feel that way is because it's subtle. It's not like something happens and Bilbo all of a sudden is a completely new character. He's a hero. He is still himself throughout the book. And I think that's really, really interesting. And honestly, despite being such a staple of classic fantasy, I feel like I haven't really seen it done that way, where throughout the book, the character is still kind of having that same flaw. It's just lessened instead of um, being a completely different character. So I really like that about the book. And then also, of course, is the physical progression. So this is very much a journey adventure book where you're trying to get from point A to point B, and I think that was done really well. I like the diversity of environments that the characters find them in. Nothing is ever focused on too long in terms of like the setting. I don't necessarily mean that in the sense of the writing, but more in the sense that we aren't in, climbing over mountains for half the book. We are progressing through different stages, and it keeps things fresh, interesting, and yeah, fun to read. So that's really the main thing I like about this story. Also, it's very imaginative. I think despite having so many things based on it or inspired by it, it still feels really fresh to me. Um, and yeah, I think that's the major criticism that these books get is that they feel old. They feel like they've been done many times. And honestly, I haven't read that much fantasy, so take my opinion on this pretty lightly, but I just I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like it was too um bland in that sense, like it was overdone. So I like that aspect. Um the only criticism I have in terms of like the journey is that the book tends to go through this formula of there is a tense moment, then a restful moment, tense moment, restful moment. And it goes on like that to the point where it almost becomes predictable, where I am like, okay, something's going to happen now because they've been resting for this amount of time. Now it's time for something tense to happen. And that's not really a flaw of the book. I think it because it was originally supposed to be a children's book. Um, that kind of structure is does better in that sense, but when you're not reading it as a children's book, it it might feel a little repetitive. But I think when Tolkien focuses more on the emotional state of the characters, it doesn't feel as repetitive because instead of focusing on the action or lack thereof, we're focusing on how the characters feel and seeing them develop through this action. So I think that really lessens my criticism of that format. So yeah, the other thing that don't I it's hard for me to articulate, but sometimes I feel like it's too whimsical. I really like the whimsical nature, but sometimes it's so whimsical it's almost comical. And again, I don't think that's a fault of the book. I think that's more my personal taste and just the fact that it was originally supposed to be a children's book. But compared to The Lord of the Rings, which isn't a fair comparison, but it's how I feel when reading it, it feels it feels like I said almost so whimsical it's comical at many points, and I think again I think that's kind of the point. I think the main reason I feel this way is like the elves don't feel as serious. They are almost like silly in nature compared to the elves in the Lord of the Rings. Also, the orcs slash goblins don't feel as serious in that sense. They don't feel as dangerous because they're singing a lot, which sometimes I actually really like when the goblins are singing. I feel like it has like a fun vibe to it, but sometimes it's like okay, everybody's just singing a lot. So maybe that's an overgeneralization, but that is how I feel. So yeah, overall, I really like it. I think the writing is great as well. That's really the last major thing I want to touch on is I think Tolkien has such a way with words where even with this simpler writing compared to The Lord of the Rings, his word choice just has a punch and a flow to it that was just really pleasant to read. And it fit the story well too. So I feel like whenever Tolkien his writing like transports me into this world just as much as like what he's actually saying. And what I mean by that is like his writing style transports me into the world. So, yeah, I really like that aspect of it. Some people don't like the writing as much, but I really enjoy it. And I think it's really just a taste thing. If you like it, you like it. But I personally just love his writing. Um, yeah, and then of course, like there's always the issue with the song breaks, where some people really like the song breaks, some people don't. I think they're good sometimes, but I also feel like it's overdone a little bit, where Sometimes I'm tired of it at some point a little bit, but it's not too bad, honestly. That's just, you can skip over them if you really don't like them. I think that's okay, honestly, in my opinion. Don't feel bad if you need to do that, but I don't think they're too bad either. I think it's part of the experience and it's good. I feel like they're good. It's good poetry as well, if that's what it's called. I'm not really I don't know much about poetry, so yeah. I really highly recommend this book if you want to get into Lord of the Rings and if you like adventure stories with lots of cool places and creatures and something that is entertaining but not too suspenseful, not too serious. I think it's great, and I highly recommend it. I have a lot of love for it, and yeah, it's very charming to me. So I can't recommend it enough, but I also at the same time think there are people, of course, who it won't be for, and that's totally fine if you don't like the things that I talked about. So. Oh, my other criticism that I forgot, that I almost forgot. In terms of being too whimsical, the other reason why it feels too whimsical to me sometimes is sometimes the characters just get out of situations on pure luck almost. And I I I I get annoyed hearing that criticism of books sometimes, but I think what frustrates me about it is the characters do dumb stuff, and instead of kind of growing from doing that dumb stuff, they get out of it just on dumb luck. But I think that criticism is lessened again by the way Tolkien focuses on the emotional state of characters, just because it makes it less about the plot of, okay, here's this obstacle, we got to get over it. It's more like, this obstacle is making me feel this way, how can I push on despite feeling that way? That's more of the obstacles, the emotional side. And if they get lucky, it's not as important, but to me it is a little important, and it does add that, like, okay, that is really just convenient almost that that happened at that point, which is okay, but I just personally felt like it was very strong in this book. And again, I know I keep saying this, but I think this is attributed to it being a children's book. I don't have this problem as much in Lord of the Rings, although there's a few instances where I have that problem, but overall, I don't have that problem as much in the Lord of the Rings. So I think that's the difference between the two. And Tolkien wasn't trying to make this a super believable or whatever fantasy story. It's a children's fairy tale, which I that bothered me a little bit, but I don't think it's too big of an issue. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on The Hobbit. I plan on reviewing The Lord of the Rings soon. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, but I will do it soon. And I also might do a spoiler-filled discussion of The Hobbit, although I don't have too much to say about it that I would consider spoilers, so maybe not. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed and have a good day.